The smoke stung my eyes before I even stepped inside. It curled in slow, heavy rings beneath the thatch, drifting low where the rafters sagged, clinging like old cobwebs to the beams blackened from years of fires. I rubbed the soot from my lashes and ducked through the narrow door, leaving behind the damp smell of earth and the day's dimming light. Inside, the warmth struck me at once, sharp with wood smoke, rich with the heavy scent of onions, softening in the pot, and faintly sour from the ale that had been drawn earlier from the cask. The fire hissed as a log shifted, sparks bursting like tiny stars and vanishing into the haze above. The pot simmered on the iron hook, its broth bubbling with cabbage leaves, a few turnips, and the knucklebone of a pig we had stretched through 3 meals already. My stomach clenched at the smell, not only with hunger, but with the steady ache of expectation. The hour of supper was the one bright thread drawn through every hard day. Whatever the toil, however thin the fare, it was the moment when the family gathered whole, when the fields released us and the night folded close like a cloak. I let the door fall shut and stamped my boots on the beaten floor, mud scattering like pebbles. My hands still tingled from gripping the plough, and beneath my nails the earth of the fields was pressed black and stubborn. My wife glanced up from the hearth where she crouched, stirring with a long wooden spoon, her wimple shadowed in the firelight. Her face was ruddy from heat, but her smile was weary. The children huddled near her, their voices low, whispering little games to pass the waiting. My eldest son, no longer a child, leaned against the wall with arms crossed, his gaze steady and solemn as though he bore more years than he had yet lived. The table stood ready, rough boards laid across trestles, with wooden bowls and trenchers cut from stale bread set out in a careful line. The smell of rye still clung to the crusts, though they were hard as stone. A round of cheese sat beside them, trimmed so thin it looked more like a memory than a meal. A pitcher of ale rested at the centre, the froth already fallen flat, but it would do. In this season, with harvest near but not yet gathered, we made do with what the earth and the Lord allowed. For a moment I only stood, letting the warmth seep into my bones. My back ached as though a weight still pressed it, and the taste of the wind lingered on my tongue, sharp with soil, edged with the sweetness of hay. I could hear, faint beyond the walls, the calls of neighbours as they too gathered their families, doors creaking shut, voices low as prayers. The village folded inward at this hour, every home turning from field to fire, from toil to table. Yet tonight, as I drew my bench near and sat at the table, I felt a hollow quiet in the air. There was space where a voice should have been. My brother's place was empty. He was often late. His work with the mill kept him long at times, but he never missed the evening meal entirely. My eyes lingered on the empty trenchers, the unfilled space on the bench. The children, too, glanced there, then quickly away, as though to look too long might summon something unwelcome. The spoon scraped against the pot, harsh in the silence, and my wife filled each bowl in turn. The stew was thin, the broth pale, yet the steam carried comfort. She set mine before me, and the scent rose warm, almost sweet where the onions had melted soft. The bread would soak it, soften enough to chew. I lifted my cup of ale and drank, the taste yeasty rough, but cool against the throat. The first swallow of the evening always felt like release, the day sliding away with it. But still, my thoughts circled the empty place. I set down my cup and listened, straining past the crackle of the fire and the whispers of the children. Beyond the door, the night pressed close. The dogs had not barked. No footsteps stirred the lane. Only the wind moved, carrying the faint creak of branches. My hand rested on the table, the wood rough beneath my skin, the grain worn smooth by years of meals shared here. I traced the grooves as though they might hold an answer, but the silence deepened, and unease crept in with it. I tried to speak, to fill the void with simple words about the field, the furrows cut deep, despite the rain, the hope of barley strong this year, but my voice sounded hollow even to my own ears. The children nodded, though they barely listened. Their eyes darted once more toward the empty place, and I felt the heaviness settle further. As I broke the bread, the crust hard enough to cut the skin of my fingers, I thought of the road that ran beyond the village. Travellers sometimes passed at dusk, their cloaks heavy with dust, Their voices strange with foreign words. Rumours clung to them like burrs, of wars in distant lands, of sickness spreading from town to town, of lords raising taxes till even the smallest hearth felt the weight. Perhaps my brother had met one such traveller, or been delayed by some tidings. Yet the air tonight carried more than absence. It carried a question I dared not give voice to. The stew cooled quickly in the bowls. We dipped our crusts and ate in silence, the sounds of chewing and swallowing louder than they should have been. My youngest laughed suddenly at some secret thought, the sound sharp as glass in the hush. My wife hushed him gently, but her own eyes flickered with unease. When the door rattled suddenly in its frame, struck by a gust of wind, every head turned at once. The stew sloshed in the bowls, and the spoon clattered to the floor. For a heartbeat, the fire seemed to dim, the smoke hanging heavier in the rafters. I rose slowly, my knees stiff, and stared at the door as though it might speak. It did not. Only the wind sighed, and the latch held firm. I lowered myself again, though my ears stayed strained. My body bent toward that silence outside. Supper resumed, yet each swallow was careful, each motion too deliberate, as though we all feared to disturb something fragile, unseen. The stew, though thin, warmed my belly. Its flavour was the essence of the earth itself. Sharp cabbage, sweet onion, the marrow of bone leaching richness into water. I chewed slowly, letting the taste remind me of days past when meat was plentiful, when autumn brought slaughter and the salted pork filled our larders deep. But this was midsummer, when fields demanded labour and food was thinnest. Each spoonful was both blessing and burden, a reminder of what was and what was not. My wife's hand brushed mine. She set down her spoon. The touch was small, fleeting, but it steadied me. Her eyes met mine, dark and shining in the firelight, and in them I read both reassurance and question. She too felt the absence, the unease. Yet she held her tongue, as did I. Words could not fill the empty place at the table. Outside, a dog barked suddenly, sharp and close. Every head lifted again. My eldest set down his cup, his jaw tight. I felt my own pulse quicken, though no step followed the bark. No voice called. The silence after was heavier than the sound itself. The children began to whisper again, too softly for me to catch the words, but their eyes flickered with fear. I cleared my throat and forced my voice into the air, speaking of the coming harvest, of the sheaves we would bind, of the bread that would rise golden in the oven. My words rang thin, but they filled the space, and that was enough. Still, as I lifted my cup again, I could not shake the weight in my chest. Tonight felt different. The smoke in the rafters hung heavier, the stew tasted sharper, the silence pressed harder, and always my gaze slid back to the empty place on the bench, waiting, as though it held the key to what the night would bring. That was how supper began, with warmth in the hearth and unease at the table, and with a place still empty, the bowls clinked softly as we bent over them, the sound too small to fill the hollow silence. The fire had burned lower, its glow dulled to a red heart beneath the smoke, and in its wavering light, the stew looked darker than it was, shadows swirling across the broth like ink. I chewed slowly, bread soaked until it crumbled between my teeth, and listened to the small noises of the household, my daughter's spoon tapping against her bowl, the faint sigh of the wind tugging at the door, the creak of the bench beneath my weight. Every sound seemed sharpened tonight, each one carrying too clearly into the space left by my brother's absence. My wife was the first to speak. Her voice was low, as though to keep from disturbing whatever watched beyond the walls. "He should have been here by now," she said, though her eyes stayed on the stew as she stirred. The children stilled, listening without looking up. I swallowed and nodded, unwilling to shape the unease into words. "Perhaps the mill wheel stuck," I offered. "The stream's been sluggish with all the rain. He may have stayed to tend it." My eldest gave a quiet grunt. He did not look convinced. His gaze flickered toward the door, jaw clenched. He had learned too early the ways silence carries warning. I wished I could tell him not to worry, to speak as fathers should, and banish fear with certainty, but I had no certainty to give. The children ate again, though more slowly, ears tilted toward every shift of the wind. To ease them, I told a small tale of the fox I'd glimpsed in the fields that morning, its coat bright as fire as it slipped through the barley. Their eyes widened, forgetting for a moment the empty place, their mouths curving with laughter when I mimicked the sly way it trotted, nose down, tail high. The sound of their laughter loosened something in my chest. For a breath the room felt whole again, but the light wavered, and with it, the mood. My youngest asked, too loudly, "Will Uncle bring meat when he comes?" He promised. The question cut through us, and no one answered at once. My wife hushed him gently, stroking his hair, but her glance toward me was sharp. He had promised. Yes, a rabbit snared, or perhaps a bird traded at the mill. Promises weighed heavy when the larder was lean. I broke the silence with a sip of ale. Its taste was rough, earthy, leaving grit at the back of the tongue. We brewed it weak for the children, stronger for ourselves. Yet even strong ale was no escape when worry soured the mouth. Across the lane, a door shut with a dull thud. Voices rose, neighbours settling to their own meals, no doubt with talk of weather and grain, the same as always. Yet tonight those voices seemed muffled, like speech underwater. I strained to catch their words, hoping for some mention of my brother, some sign of news, but the sound dissolved into the wind. My wife served the last of the stew, scraping the pot clean with the spoon. The bone clattered against iron as she lifted it, and the hollow sound made my skin prickle. Nothing wasted, nothing left. Even the bone would boil again tomorrow, its marrow leaching thinner each time. We ate quietly, swallowing what little warmth the food gave, though my thoughts circled endlessly. Where was he? The children whispered among themselves now, trading guesses in voices they thought we could not hear. Perhaps he is with the Reeve, one said. Perhaps he went to the woods. Another shook her head, eyes wide. The woods are cursed, she breathed. Their words stirred memories in me. Tales of spirits haunting the tree lines, of riders seen where no horse left print. Such stories were told in winter to chill the nights. But in summer, with the fields alive and work pressing, they were better left unsaid. Yet hunger and fear make old tales slip back like shadows under the door. I set down my spoon and looked around the table. Their faces glowed faint in the firelight, the lines of my wife's mouth drawn tight, my eldest grim as a man twice his age, the little ones wide-eyed. This was dinner in our village. Not feast, but endurance. Not abundance, but gathering. The food mattered less than the togetherness. The certainty that as night closed in, we would face it side by side. And yet tonight that certainty faltered. One place empty could unravel all the rest. Outside, the dogs barked again. Louder this time, urgent. My eldest rose, hand pressed against the table for steadiness. "I'll see," he muttered, moving toward the door. My wife half stood to stop him, but I raised a hand. Better to know than to sit blind in dread. He unlatched the door. The wind burst in, carrying the smell of damp earth, sharp and cold, and the sound of rustling leaves. The dogs barked once more, then fell silent, as though their throats had been gripped. He leaned out, scanning the dark, then pulled the door shut quickly. "Nothing," he said, though his face was pale. We settled again, but the whispers had begun. First my daughter asked, "Is it true, father, that the sickness has come nearer?" Her voice was thin, fragile as cobweb. I felt my wife's eyes on me, her spoon stilled mid-air. The rumour had been carried by a trader last week. Plague in the town southward, houses sealed, whole families gone. I had hoped the children had not heard, but of course they had. In villages, no word stayed hidden long. I forced calm into my voice. "We are far from the towns. The fields are our shield. The Lord watches us." The words sounded strong enough, though inside I felt the hollowness of them. Faith was bread. It kept hunger from gnawing, but it did not always fill. The children nodded, reassured at least for now. But the air had shifted. Dinner was no longer simple meal, but gathering of whispers, a circle of breath held tight against what lurked beyond. The stew bowls emptied, but no one rose. We lingered, as though rising might open the door to whatever pressed outside. My wife folded her hands, lips moving in silent prayer. My eldest poured more ale, though he barely drank it. I rubbed my hands together, feeling the rough calluses scrape, grounding myself in the work I knew. The plough, the soil, the cycle that turned steady when men could not. Still, my gaze found the empty place again. My brother should have been laughing here, telling some tale of the mill, teasing the children, breaking the heaviness with his voice. Without him, the table felt incomplete, like a wheel missing a spoke, and without that spoke, the wheel shuddered, uncertain how long it might hold. The fire popped suddenly, loud as a crack, and we all started. My youngest dropped his cup, ale spilling across the board, seeping into the trencher bread. My wife snatched it up, murmuring softly to calm him, but the sound of that spill seemed too much like blood in the silence. We sat back in uneasy quiet. The stew was gone, the bread eaten, the cheese cut to rind, yet no one rose. We waited, bowls empty, eyes flickering toward the door, and then a knock. Not the wind this time, not the rattle of a loose board. A knock, soft, measured, once, twice, thrice. The dogs did not bark. The children froze. My wife's hand gripped mine tight. My eldest stood again, but his legs trembled. The knock came once more, then silence. We did not move. Dinner had ended, but the night had only just begun. The knock still lingered in the wood, as though the door itself remembered it. We sat unmoving, the fire low, our breaths shallow. My hand pressed against the table, the grain biting into my skin. I could hear the stew pot settling above the embers, its hiss a whisper. For a long moment no one moved, no one spoke. It was as though time itself held us pinned in our places, waiting to see who would rise first. At last I stood. My knees cracked softly as I straightened, and the children's eyes followed me, wide and unblinking. My wife caught my sleeve, her grip trembling. "Wait," she murmured, but waiting would not answer. Whoever stood beyond our door had already heard the scrape of benches, the rustle of whispers. Silence would not make us invisible. I crossed the floor slowly. Each step felt loud, too loud, the boards groaning beneath me like they too wished me still. The latch was cool against my fingers. I lifted it gently, easing the door open just a crack. The night poured in, thick with damp air and the scent of grass crushed by dew. Darkness pressed against the doorway, heavy and unbroken, the lane swallowed by shadow. The dogs were silent now, shapes only, crouched low near the hedge. Their eyes gleamed faintly in the firelight that spilled through the crack, but they made no sound, not even a growl. "Who goes there?" My voice was rough, low, carried only a few steps beyond the door. No answer came. Only the whisper of leaves in the oak by the lane, the faint drip of water from the eaves. I pushed the door wider, heart thudding, my eyes strained against the dark. There was no shape upon the lane, no figure waiting, only the night, endless and still. Yet I knew the knock had come. 3 times, deliberate, a man's hand, or something else. I could not say. I closed the door slowly. The latch fell into place with a dull clink that seemed too final. I turned, met my wife's eyes. She searched my face, waiting for some word to ease her fear, but I had none. I only shook my head and returned to the bench. The children whispered again, voices thin as threads. My eldest did not sit. He remained standing, arms folded, gaze fixed on the door as though he could hold it closed with his eyes alone. My wife began to gather the bowls, though her hands trembled, spoons clattering softly against wood. The noise was too much, too careless. She stilled them at once, setting each aside as though placing bones in a grave. I reached for my cup, though I did not drink. My fingers curled around it, seeking steadiness. The ale scent rose, sharp and sour, but my mouth was dry. I listened to the silence outside, to the creak of the rafters above, to the small stirrings of the children shifting uneasily on the bench. Every sound seemed both near and far, as though the walls no longer held the world out but only thinned it, made it stranger. The fire guttered low. Shadows stretched across the floor, dark fingers creeping toward us. My youngest, huddled close to his sister, eyes darting from door to hearth. He whispered, "Perhaps it was Uncle." His hope was fragile, thin as breath. "Perhaps," I said softly, though the words tasted false. "My brother never knocked like that." He called out, loud and merry, his voice filling the lane before he reached the door. He would have entered without hesitation, laughing at our surprise, that soft, measured knock. No, that was not his way. The thought pressed heavier against me. I leaned back, staring into the smoke curling beneath the rafters. The stew's scent still lingered, sharp with onion, rich with marrow, but now it seemed tainted, heavy. Hunger warred with unease in my belly. Dinner had filled us, yet none of us felt full. Outside, the dogs whined suddenly, a thin sound almost human in its sadness. My eldest moved to the shutter, pushed it open a crack. He peered out, his breath fogging in the chill. I watched his shoulders tense. "What do you see?" I asked quietly. He closed the shutter at once, shaking his head. "Nothing," but his voice was too fast, too sharp. He lied to ease us, or to ease himself. I let it pass. To press him would only feed the fear. Instead, I spoke of the morrow. "Tomorrow we rise early," I said, forcing steadiness. "The barley must be checked, the weeds cut. There is work enough for all of us." The children nodded, though their eyes lingered on the door. My wife folded her hands again, lips moving in silent prayer. The words she shaped were familiar, the same she whispered each night, but tonight they seemed more urgent, as though each syllable were a shield raised against the dark. We lingered long at the table, though the bowls were empty. None wished to leave the circle of firelight. The cottage beyond seemed vast, hollow, shadows pressing against its corners. My eldest fetched a candle from the shelf, its flame small, trembling. He set it near the door, as though a light placed there might hold back what knocked. Time crept. The children drooped with weariness, their heads nodding, but they resisted sleep, fearful of what dreams might bring. My wife at last rose, guiding them gently toward the straw pallet in the corner. They lay close together, whispering until their words dissolved into breath. Even asleep, their faces were tight, as though dreams carried the same unease. I remained at the table, my eldest across from me, both of us listening. The fire sank lower, the embers glowing like eyes in the ash. The candle sputtered faintly, its wax dripping in slow rivulets down the side. And then, faint but clear, came a sound beyond the door. Not a knock this time. A step, a slow, dragging step across the lane. Another followed, uneven, as though the weight behind it faltered. My eldest stiffened, hand gripping the edge of the table. I raised a hand for silence, though none of us breathed. The steps paused. For a long moment, nothing, then a sigh. Low, almost a moan, carried through the crack beneath the door. My blood turned cold. My wife clutched the children close though they stirred in sleep, murmuring faintly. I rose once more, though my legs felt heavy. The candlelight flickered as I moved, shadows leaping across the walls. I pressed my ear to the wood. The chill of the night seeped through it, damp and sharp, and there, faint, the sound of breath. Someone stood there, close, silent, waiting. I did not open the door, not this time. I stepped back, heart hammering, and slid the bolt across. The scrape of iron on wood rang loud in the hush. My eldest's eyes met mine, wide, unblinking. He nodded once, as though in answer to a question unspoken. We returned to the table, but no one spoke. The silence now was thick, suffocating. The stew pot hissed faintly, cooling to ash. The candle guttered, casting long quivering shadows. The steps did not come again. Whoever, whatever, had stood outside, it had gone, or waited still in silence. I did not know which was worse. The night stretched long. Our supper turned to ash in our mouths. Every creak of the rafters, every whisper of wind against the walls, carried weight. Dinner had ended, yet its shadow remained, darkening all that followed. And through it all, the empty place at the table watched us, silent, waiting, as though it knew more than we. The night had thinned to a strange stillness, the kind that makes a man's ears ache with listening. The candle by the door bent its flame toward the crack beneath, as if the dark were drawing breath from our room. My eldest stood with his hands on the table, knuckles white. My wife's lips still moved in prayer. The children lay close, feigning sleep and failing it, their lashes trembling. Then the bell began. Not the even dutiful curfew we hear at dusk, that had already passed, but a broken, urgent peal, 2 strokes too close, a clutching pause, then a ragged third. The church sat no more than a field away, and the bell's iron voice ran along the lanes like a hand pulling us all by the collars. With it came shouting, quick and breathless, feet thudding past our door, then the knock, this time hard, hurried, the latch quivering. Before my wife could speak, I slid the bolt and pulled the door. Beadle Hammond stood there, cap askew, rushlight bobbing in his fist, breath smoking in the cool. Mud streaked his hose up to the knee, and his chest heaved under his jerkin. "To the mill," he gasped, wheels jammed with the floodwash. "Thanksgiving." Osbert's called hue and cry. "Go." He was gone before I could answer. His next knock's already striking the neighbour's door, the rushlight smearing orange across the night. Behind him the bell laboured on, clanging as if the church itself had a fever. The children, my wife said, already gathering them nearer the hearth, the old calm returning to her voice like a cloak. "Go, take the boy, I'll follow with pails." Her eyes flicked to me, and I saw the thing she did not say. "Your brother." I snatched my cloak and the bucket by the door. My eldest grabbed the yoke we used for water and slung it across his shoulders, hooking 2 smaller pails to its pegs. We plunged into the lane. The dogs, finding their courage in our motion, burst into barks as if they had been crying in silence for this permission all along. The night smelled of wet earth and crushed metal, of smoke blown slant from banked hearths, of damp wool and breath. Doors opened all along the lane, rushlights flaring, voices rising into the bell's ragged ring. Men ran with shovels and gavelocks, boys with pots and wooden bowls, women with baskets and cloths. The smith, Hodge, pounded past me with his iron hook over one shoulder, the great muscles of his bare forearms slick with sweat in the cool. Old Goody Alice, the midwife, trotted after him with her bundle of linens, muttering psalms under her breath. Sir John the priest came last down the church path at an awkward, earnest trot, a lantern swinging at his hip, his cross bumping against his chest. We crested the small rise where the lane drops toward the stream, and there the mill lay below us, the squat timbered body of it, crouched over the water, the wheel a great black ribcage against the moon dim. But the stream was no gentle ribbon tonight. The rains of the last days had filled it to its banks, and then above them, and now the mill race snarled with branches and reed stalks torn from the edges, the water thrusting and sucking with a sound like a beast eating at a trough. The wheel had stopped half-turned, one great spoke lifted like the arm of a man thrown and left that way. Where the mill pond should have been quiet, a rimming lip of water wobbled against the packed earth bank, and then slid over, faster with each heartbeat, cutting dark streaks down the outer face toward the meadow. "Line!" roared Osbert the Reeve, his voice cutting through the bell. "From the pond to the meadow, past earth, past stones. Quick now, quick. Hodge, the wheel. Get that tangle clear, or we'll lose the sluice." The villagers fell into motion as if the lane itself had a memory of what to do. Men dug at the soft bank with shovels and the flats of their spades, scraping up baskets of sod and clay. Women ripped wattle hurdles from the hedges. Boys fetched stones from the ditch and dropped them thudding into the baskets. A line formed, hands to hands, baskets to baskets, earth moving in small stubborn miracles from one end to the other. We were a single creature with many hands, heart beating with the bell. I flung off my cloak and dropped to the bank, digging with my spade where Osbert pointed. My eldest planted his feet in the mud and took his place midway down the line, passing filled baskets and sending them on, his shoulders working under the weight. The stream threw cold on our faces with each slap of water against the wheelhouse. The spray tasted of iron and leaf and old silt woken from its bed. "Where is he?" I shouted over the roar, but no one answered me at once. Then Hodge, already knee-deep in the mill race with his hook, jerked his chin toward the wheel's shadow. "Went in early," he bellowed. Said the sluice needed looking. With the rain. Tried to pull the branches when the first rush came. God blind me if he didn't, and I hauled him for a breath. But the wheel rolled and threw him. He's below the tail race now, or he's crawled out. I've not seen him since. My brother in the water? My brother under the wheel? The thought made the night tilt. I dropped my spade and stumbled along the edge where the tail race ran, narrower and faster, spilling back to the stream. Lanterns winked here and there, men moving, the light flaring quick on water, and then swallowed. "Durant," I shouted. The sound ripped away. Durant. A darker darkness loomed at the tail end of the wheelhouse, the low arch where water spat back through. I crouched, belly flat to the wet boards, and reached down with my free hand to the slick stones beneath. Water tongued my fingers, bit my knuckles with its cold. Sharon shouted again, and this time an answer came. Not his name, not a word, but a low choked sound, part cough, part groan. "Hodge," I yelled. "Here." He splashed to me at once. Hook lifted. Together we slid under the lip of the wheelhouse, belly scraping wood, shoulders taking splinters. The noise there was a trapped thunder, water colliding against wood and rock in a close place. The lantern's light bobbled off the boards. In its tremble I saw him. He lay half in the water, half out, his right leg twisted beneath him, and his tunic plastered to his chest, his face the colour of old wax, his hair, so often a bright, unruly thatch, clung in dark ropes to his brow. His teeth showed in a grimace. His lips were too cold to keep. His hands moved weakly against the stones, as if he were polishing them, trying to make them kinder. His eyes found me at once, the way a man finds the one thing he was trying not to lose. "I knocked," he whispered. The words were the frailest thread, almost taken by the water's mouth. "Couldn't wait. Hammon." "The bell." "I heard," I said, and my own voice broke. "Brother," I heard. We moved without thinking then, the way men do when there is no time left for fear. I got my hands under his shoulders while Hodge, cursing softly and reverently in the same breath, freed the twisted leg. Durant's cry was small and cut short, a sparrow noise in the storm. We dragged him out from under the wheelhouse lip, inch by inch, the boards tearing at our tunics, water sucking at our boots. When at last we had him on the bank, the lantern shook so that everything leaped. His face became a stranger's, and then my brother's, and then a stranger's again. "Blankets!" I shouted up the bank. "Linens! Alice!" The old midwife was already there, shawl askew, her hands firm as a smith's. She thrust a roll of linen at me. "Press there," she said, pointing at the torn place along Gerant's thigh where skin and cloth had made ruin together. "Hold till he curses you. That's how you know he's alive." She leaned close to his face, peered at his eyes, slapped his cheek twice, brisk as a housewife dusting a stool. "Back with us, lad," she said without tenderness and full of love. "You've no time for dying tonight. We've a mill to keep." Men straddled the tail race, passing Hodge's hook from hand to hand, wrenching free a matted raft of alder branches and weed. Each time they freed a lump, the water took it as a wolf takes a haunch, tearing it away, and for a beat the wheel shuddered forward and then locked again. And above us the line at the bank moved faster. Baskets, 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 the hiss and thump of earth thrown down and stamped, thrown down and stamped. The reeve's voice cracked and rose and cracked again. "Hold, hold, damn you, hold." Sir John stumbled to us with his lantern and his cross, his spectacles fogged. He knelt in the mud as if all the great stones of the church were pressing him down. "God's peace," he said, breathless. He touched the cross to Gerant's wet brow. "You'll give no coin to St. Peter tonight, Miller. There's flour yet to make." Gerant opened his eyes and tried to grin. It came out as a grimace, but it was his, and I felt my heart unfreeze a little. "The reeve never misses a chance to save a penny," he mumbled. "Good," Alice said. "If he's got breath to jest, he's got breath to live." "You," she jabbed a bony finger at me. "Lift him as if he were a sack of barley. Only be kinder. You," she pointed to my eldest, who had appeared at my shoulder, hair plastered to his skull, mouth open with panting. "Get behind and take the leg. Mind you, keep it the way I set it. And you, priest, hold the lantern where I can see, and if you've a prayer for keeping men together when water would tear them, say it now." We lifted. The rain made a sound that cut me open and left the edges. The lantern threw our shadows long over the bank. Stretched men, trying to be bigger than they were. We bore him up to the line, where the ground trembled with many feet and the pond's lip shivered with each throw of earth. Make room. Osbert bellowed and the line parted without losing rhythm, as if we were a fish that must wriggle through without breaking the net. Lay him there, Alice ordered, pointing to a dry patch where someone had flung down a door taken from its hinges. We eased him onto it, and the door groaned as if remembering its old duty of bearing a threshold. Alice bound his thigh tight with linen, and when the bleeding stuttered, loosed it and bound it again, her hands sure, her mouth muttering words that were part prayer, part counting. She pressed her palm to his chest, listened to his breath, then nodded once. "He'll not drown from the inside," she said to me, and I felt something in my own chest loosen. The bell faltered and stopped. Perhaps the beadle had no breath left. In its place rose the raw sounds of body and earth, shovels biting, baskets thumping, boots squelching, men and women calling to one another. Not to stop, not yet, just one more throw, one more basket. The night had become a forge, and we were the ore in it, hammered and heated and hammered again. "Hodge!" Osbert shouted. "Now!" The smith planted his feet in the mill race and heaved on the great timber that braced the sluice gate. 2 men waded beside him, shoulders under the beam. The gate stuck. Hodge's back bent into a bow, his teeth showing white in a red face. "Now!" the reeve shouted again, and men on the bank leaned in with their weight, hands to timber, arms to arms. The beam groaned, and old animals groaned, reluctant and offended, and then slid 2 finger breadths. Water leapt like a creature, freed from a trap. The mill shuddered. The wheel rolled half a turn and caught again. "One more," Hodge roared. "Give it your mother's curses." With a great binding of sound, men's voices braided, the water's growl, the timber's complaint. The gate lifted another hand's breadth. A sheet of water hurled itself through, found the channel to the meadow, and ran like a thief. We all staggered with the sudden let go. The bank took a deep shuddering breath and held, for a count of 5 heartbeats. No one spoke. Even the water seemed to reconsider its plan. Then Osbert laughed, a short cracked bark that startled itself out of him, and slapped Hodge's back with a sound like 2 hams meeting. Voices rose. Not joy exactly, not that, but something like it. The tight thread loosened. Men whooped once, awkwardly, then bent again to tamp the earth, shore the places where the water still sought weak flesh in the bank. I looked to Garand. His face had a little colour now, the ghastly wax replaced by the cheap pewter we all wear after fright. He lifted his hand to me and found mine and held it, our fingers muddy and cold and sure. "You always wanted to be the better miller," he whispered, lip twitching. "Tonight you were. I'll charge you rent for the door." "Hush," Alice said, but she was smiling crookedly, which is the only honest way to smile at such a time. My wife arrived then, skirts dark to the knee, hair twisted loose under her wimple, 2 pails swinging from her yoke. Our daughter followed with a bundle of kindling, wrapped in cloth. Our small son trotted heavy with a pot, his little body alight with the solemnity of carrying it. She took in the scene in a breath, the line, the gate, the wheel, the door with my brother upon it, and came straight to us. She set down the pails and went to her knees, palms to Geraint's cold cheeks, the old tenderness between those 2 catching like dry tinder. "Fool," she murmured, which in our tongue means brother and friend, and the one God did not forget. He tried to catch her hand and failed, and she caught his instead. Then she looked at me. "Home," she said. "He goes home. No arguments. The mill will live a night without him." We bound him as best we could, lashed to poles, Sir John and Hodge fetched, and bore him up the lane with 4 men under him and the children bearing the lantern. The line at the pond kept moving, the earth kept passing, the water kept testing, but we were a little apart now, a small creature peeled aside from the body of the village and moving on its own legs. Our shadows went with us, long and wobbling, lantern stitched to our feet. The air high above had cleared in the struggle. A rag of cloud pulled back from the moon's frayed edge, and silver went down on the wet field so that every droplet on every blade of grass became a bead. The poor man's jewels, The smell of mint rose where someone's boots had crushed it along the ditch. Somewhere, tired and indomitable, a nightjar spun its wheel of fortune song. We set the poles down at our door. My wife opened it wide, and the warmth and the smell of our supper, now a ghost of what it had been, came out and met us like a loyal dog, apologetic for not having teeth enough for such a night. We slid Durant in and laid him near the hearth on the long bench, then moved him to the pallet where the little ones had slept, and now rose sleepy and proud to give it. Alice shooed me aside and took my place at his thigh, testing the binding, slipping her palm under the linen to see if the blood still crept. Sir John set the lantern on the table. Its light found the bowls where we had left them, the trencher bread sogged and caved, the rinds of cheese gone greasy with the room's heat, the spoon my wife had dropped earlier, lying on the floor, the handle ash-dusted. My eldest crouched at the door, watching the lane and listening with his whole body, like a hare sits with ears and bones. The bell had not begun again. Perhaps the pond would hold. The house breathed around us, the crackle from a new log my wife set, the sigh of the banked embers waking, the little clink of metal as Alice's needle went in and out to stitch a torn place in flesh, where the linen alone would not hold. Geraint's breath rasped and caught and rasped again. In between those sounds came the old, familiar small noises of a home at this hour, the simmer of something forgotten on the hearthstone. My wife had set the pot back to warm a thin draught for him, the soft scrape of my daughter's bare feet on the floor as she fetched water and warmed it in her hands. The way her mother had taught her, the whispered counting of the youngest as he sorted 3 round pebbles he had found by the door and now set in a row for luck. One for the mill, one for Uncle, one for the wheel that had spared him. I could not sit. I moved from door to hearth to table and back, like the steam that had nowhere to go but up and then down again. My hands found tasks because men's hands must. I wiped the table, as if order there could charm order back into the night. I righted the spoon and set it beside a bowl that now felt like the shell of a bird's egg from which the chick had never risen. I lifted the ale pitcher and set it down and lifted it again, and then drank, and the taste was the taste of fear made thin and ordinary, as fear always is when it must be carried. Geraint roused and drifted and roused again. Once he blinked at me as if he had dreamed me and was not pleased to find me real. "Did we eat?" he asked, lips trembling with the effort. "I think there was a rabbit promised. There will be more rabbits than we can keep," my wife said, "and if there was a lie in it, it was of the kind that sows seed and sometimes reaps truth." She dipped a spoon and brought it to his mouth, coaxed him with it, made of that act a ritual older than any bell. He swallowed twice and winced, but the third swallow went smooth. "Good," Alice said. "If a man can eat, devil and death must wait their turn." Outside, down the lane and beyond the hedges, the sounds of labour slowly thinned. The line at the pond would be shortening now. The baskets would travel slower and then not at all. Men would lean their shovels into the bank and stand a while, heads hanging, water shining black against their boots. The reeve would count the tools and count the men and find them all, or almost. The smith would carry his hook home like a child asleep in his arms. The beadle would go to the church and pat the bell as if it were a tired ox. The night would settle back into its old sounds as if it had only put on another face for an hour to frighten us into wakefulness. We had thought dinner a small thing, a bowl and a blessing, and the known faces in the known light. And then the bell had knocked us into the lane, and the known faces had become men and women in the river's spray with their mouths open like fish, and our bowls had cooled on the boards while our hands tamped earth against water, and the one voice missing at our table had returned to us soaked and shaking on a door taken from its hinges. The food we had eaten earlier, thin as it was, sat inside us now like a banked ember, the heat we needed to stand where the night shoved. Even the bread we had scorned for its hardness had done its duty. Its stubbornness had made ours. When at last the door filled with a slow shape and Osbert stood there, hat in his hands, mud a second skin, he did not need to speak. We read it in the slant of his shoulders. The pond would hold till morning. The sluice would be repinned. The wheel would turn again when the stream's beast had slept. He cleared his throat, wiped one boot on the other, and stared hard at the bread, as if it insulted him. "We'll need men at first light," he said, "but not you." He looked at my brother and away, and back again. Not you. The words were as gentle as Osbert could make them, which is to say they were iron-beaten thin enough to bend. He went, and the room grew quiet in a new way. The village's noise had not been holding us up, it had been blowing us from behind. Without it, we had only our own breath and the small irons of duty in our hands. We bedded Geraint under our best blanket, the one we held back for christenings and last visits. My eldest laid the bench by the pallet and sat on it like a guard. The little ones drifted at last, their mouths open, their hands still dirty with work they would be proud to remember. Sir John said a prayer that seemed shorter than all the others he had ever spoken and perhaps wider. Alice set her palm above Geraint's heart and closed her eyes and nodded. Not yes, not no, only the nod that says, still. My wife took the pot from the hearth and held it for a moment as if it were a child. Steam rose and fogged her lashes. She set it down and came to me and leaned her forehead against my chest. Only a breath, then stepped away as if she had borrowed strength and must pay interest on it. The door was half closed. Through the wedge of night I could see the wet shine of the lane. The candle by the door had burned low. The flow of wax had made a small mountain at its base, thin ridges frozen in their fall. I snuffed it with wetted fingers, and in the softer light of the hearth, the table looked gentler, the bowls like small moons fallen to earth and contented with it. I lifted the spoon one more time, then let it go. It lay there like a little oar on a lake where no boat would come. In the hush that followed, with the mill breathing slow again beyond the fields, and the pond holding its lip like a man who has stopped his weeping, I heard it. The faint lick and settle of the stew as it caught a little on the side where the heat licked it, the tiniest hiss like a word reluctant to speak. It was foolishness to hear it so, but I could not help it. It sounded like the line passing basket said all over again, hold, hold, hold. We banked the fire at last, as the bell had told us to do at dusk before the night took its temper. Ash fell in soft sighs. In the grey that remained, faces were only shapes, the beloved kind that have no names because you do not need them. I lay down with my cloak under my head and my boots still on, as we all did in seasons like this, and the last thing I saw before sleep came looking for me was the curve of my brother's hand on the blanket, not clenched, not open, but cupped, as if it were holding the warmth we had all made together and would not let it spill. The fire was little more than a hushed glow when I opened my eyes again. Ash lay soft across the hearthstones, grey as sifted flour, with faint cracks of red running through it like veins beneath skin. The room held its breath, quiet but for the low rasp of my brother's breathing, the creak of timber when the house shifted in the night, and the occasional sigh from one of the children as they turned in their sleep. For a moment, I did not know if it was still night or if dawn had come. The shutters leaked no light, only the dimest hint of shadow, the kind that could belong to either moon or sun. My bones ached as though I had been struck, my back stiff from lying in my cloak. The taste of smoke lingered on my tongue, and my eyes stung, swollen from the long night. I turned my head and saw Geraint. He lay pale still, though some colour had returned to his cheeks. His breath came easier now, no longer ragged but steady, even if shallow. The linen about his thigh was stained dark, but Alice had bound it well. She slept slumped in the corner, her arms folded, head bowed, yet her posture was the kind of sleep that wakes with any change in the air. My wife had stretched beside the younger children, her hand resting lightly on their hair, though even in slumber her face was taut with worry. I rose slowly, boots scraping the packed earth floor, and crossed to the door. The latch lifted with a faint whine. Cool air slipped in, carrying the scent of wet soil and trampled grass, the faint sweetness of meadow mint, and the sharp, raw smell of water still unsettled in the stream. I stepped outside. The village lay quiet, but not asleep. Wisps of smoke rose from other roofs where fires had been kept through the night. A few doors already stood open, men stooping to fetch water or women shaking cloths at the thresholds. The church bell was silent now, its iron tongue stilled, though I fancied I could hear the echo of it in my bones still, the way one hears the sea long after leaving it. I walked the lane, my boots sinking into mud, still wet from the rains. The dogs padded after me, tails low, their paws silent in the soft earth. The sky above was paling, threads of light unraveling the night. In the east, a faint ribbon of rose glowed where the sun waited, though the stars still clung stubbornly overhead. The air was sharp and new, as though the world had been scoured clean by the night's ordeal. When I reached the rise, I stopped. The mill lay below, crouched in mist, the wheel black against the silver of dawn. Men moved still along the bank, stamping earth, setting hurdles, their voices low but steady. The pond's lip shone wet, scarred with claw marks, where the water had tried to break through, but it held. The wheel turned slowly now, the stream's beast tamed for a time, creaking in weary rhythm. All I'd had alive, my hands clasped, and felt the weight of it all. The mill had been spared, but only just. My brother had been spared, but only just. Our supper had ended with bowls half eaten, bread left broken on the boards, and yet here we were, still together, still breathing, still tethered to the earth. When I returned, the cottage smelled of broth again. My wife had warmed what little remained of the stew. Thinned with water, bulked with a heel of bread, she fed the children first, coaxing spoonfuls into them before they could protest. They ate sleepily, their heads nodding, eyes half closed. Geraint roused when the steam touched his nose. She bent and gave him a sip, steadying the spoon with both hands. He swallowed, coughed once, then managed another mouthful. We ate in silence. Not the silence of fear this time, but of weariness. The bread softened in the broth and fell apart. The ale was flat, yet never had food seemed such a mercy. Each bite was proof that we had endured the night. After the bowls were scraped clean and the children settled again, I remained at the table, tracing the grooves in the wood with my finger. The room was different now. The shadows did not press so heavy, the rafters did not sag so low. The same smoke clung in the beams, the same soot stained the walls, yet the air was changed. We had sat together through more than hunger, more than routine. We had held one another against what pressed from outside. I thought of how often I had cursed our meals. Thin stews, hard bread, cheese cut so narrow you could see light through it. I thought of how many times I had longed for feast days, for meat that dripped fat, for pies rich with spice, for ale strong enough to warm a man from the inside. But last night had shown me the truth. Dinner was never only food. It was a gathering, a shield, a binding of lives around a single fire. It was the sound of spoons clinking, the warmth of breath rising together, the sight of familiar faces in flickering light, and when danger came, flood, wheel, or death's knock on the door, it was that bond that held us. Not the broth in the pot. Outside, the light strengthened. The first rooster crowed. The dogs stretched and shook themselves, their collars clinking. The village was waking, though it had scarcely slept. Soon the line of labour would begin again. Men to the fields, women to the hearths, children to their tasks. But for this moment the house was still. The children slept in a tangled knot. Geraint drifted, his face eased, his breath steady. My wife sat near him, her hand resting lightly on his arm, eyes half closed. Alice stirred, muttering in her dreams, then shifted and fell silent. I remained at the table, watching the embers collapse into ash. The room smelled of smoke and stew, of damp wool and sweat, of iron from the blood that had been bound. It was the smell of life, hard and unadorned, yet precious. One bowl sat untouched on the table. I do not know why I had set it out, perhaps out of habit, perhaps out of hope. It lay there now, half-shadowed, its surface cooling, steam long gone. A spoon rested across it, the handle blackened with soot. In the silence, I stared at it, and it seemed to me a reminder of the place that had been empty, of the night that had tested us, of the thin line that always lay between fullness and hunger, presence and loss. I did not move it. I left it where it was, cooling in the ash-scented air, a silent guest at the table. And so morning came to us, not with bells or shouts, but with the faint sigh of wind in the thatch, the slow brightening of light through the shutter cracks, and the knowledge that we had held together against the dark. You've been listening to Lost SAPIEN, If you wish to return to these quiet corners of history, subscribing will keep the path open.